The British royal family. What did they ever do for us, except hoover up money from the civil list, smirk at us from £5 notes, and attempt to flog us their organic ginger biscuits? Actually, there is one thing that we can all be grateful to them for.
It's an elegant hulk of a building in the middle of Mayfair, and it only exists because George IV and his mates wanted somewhere to take their pickups without embarrassing themselves in front of their families and servants. All grand hotels have grand guests, that's why they exist. But Claridge's has always catered for the really, really grand. This is where you come if you find the types who you run into at the Ritz a little too déclassé, and it's been here for nearly 200 years.
In 1813, when this hotel was founded, royal scandals like Camillagate and Squidgygate would never have happened. Regency Britons would have been faintly surprised to discover that the Prince of Wales didn't have a mistress.
The future George IV encouraged his friend James Mivart to open some high-class lodgings, and then made full use of them to have his royal way with anything that took his royal fancy. It wasn't exactly a secret hideaway, more a comfy set of apartments in which a person of blue blood might throw off his periwig in gay abandon.
Mivart's place was modest, domestic. It had nothing so grand as this French salon. All that came much later, after the original buildings had been extended, knocked through, demolished, rebuilt and renamed Claridge's.
The hotel on Brook Street has spent much of its last 190 odd years in a state of mutation. The body of today's building dates from the final years of Queen Victoria's reign, but the entrance hall is an Art Deco add-on. Oswald Milne built a whole new extension to the hotel in the 1930s, and deco details abound. At that time, Claridge's, already over a century old, was so cool that Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald gave it the thumbs up. So did the England cricket team. And Claridge's makeover has never stopped. Right in the middle of the Victorian foyer is this modern creation by Dale Chihuly. This is 21st century gallery art. Claridge's isn't hawking its own heritage to impressionable slackjaws with fat wallets. It's never been shy of getting in the decorators. The restaurant used to look like this, but now it's like this. And the chef here couldn't be more flavour of the month. And here's something that demonstrates the cyclical nature of taste. The smoking room is back, a stylish way of segregating the addicts from the rest. And it's so cosily upholstered that all thoughts of the cancer ward are banished from your mind.
But back at the beginning of the 19th century, all this was to come. Fags were roll your own, and big hotels hadn't been invented. They just didn't exist anywhere in the world. If you were a Briton away from home on a trip, then it was the coaching inn, the boarding house, or a night in Hyde Park, sleeping under a copy of the Times.
So James Mivart, the original proprietor, was basically running an upmarket B&B, albeit one where the minimum stay was a month. But he had a unique selling point.
Mivart had the advantage of being slap bang in the middle of Mayfair. That's the frightening blue bit on the Monopoly board. The location and his discretion must have brought him lots of satisfied customers, because Mivart's began to expand, building by building.
By 1853, he'd taken over 4 neighbouring houses, enough for a hotel, as every Monopoly player knows. It's also enough to retire on, and that's what Mivart did, selling up to a couple named William and Marianne Claridge.
Mr. Claridge loved royalty, loved it.
He was the flunky's flunky. He was a bit like Paul Burrell, but without the book contract and all those frocks in the closet. It was said that he varied the depth of his bows according to the position of the recipient in the Almanac de Gotha. So a Royal Highness would get a much more deep bow than a Serene Highness. Claridge's customer service kept the buildings full, with such a pack of kings, queens, archdukes and duchesses that the hotel became known as the Royal Hostelry and the annex to Buckingham Palace, a reputation it's never lost. But by the time William Claridge bowed out in the 1890s, the lack of lifts was causing customers to defect, as was the absence of electricity and ensuite bathrooms. Compared to newcomers like the Savoy, Claridge's old place seemed dowdy and outmoded. Its days seemed numbered. The hotel was actually saved by its chief competitor. It was bought by the Savoy's owner, Richard D'Oyley Carte. He kept the name, but knocked down all the 18th century houses, building instead a lavish new structure which matched the expectation of fin de siècle aristos. Yet Claridge's stayed true to its roots as a boarding house. The hotel wasn't just somewhere to kip for a night or two. Most guests stayed much longer. You'd think prices were too vulgar for the nobility to worry about, but the ads kept drawing attention to them. London's transient population of toffs were told it made economic sense to live at the hotel. Why bother keeping a townhouse that stayed shrouded in dust sheets for most of the year, when you could book into Claridge's for a similar outlay?
According to this advertisement, giving a dance at Claridge's involves no more expense than giving a dance in your own home. There's an asterisk. Because holding the dance in your own home means the hiring of additional staff, chairs, plate, china, linen, glasses, etc., purchase of flowers, wear and tear of your own furniture, and many other expenses, quite apart from the caterer's charges. Well, that's me convinced. First thing in the morning, all those bags of nuts are going back to Waitrose.
Claridge's offered everything the self-respecting aristo could need, and unlike most hotels of its vintage, it still does. According to a brochure, flowers play an important part in helping towards the gaiety and dignity of a party.
Yes, I wonder if you could help me out with a buttonhole.
Of course I can.
What can you recommend?
Would you like a pink rose?
No, it's good.
How long are you staying in the hotel?
Until they ring my bank.
Oh, and discover you have your money. So.
Thank you very much. I feel very dignified then.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Of course, there's a barber's shop offering all those little trims and scrapes previously carried out by your valet.
Wow.
And you can treat the luggage room like your own attic.
This is one of our luggage storerooms. We've got space just like this on most floors of the hotel. And every time one of our regular guests stays with us, more often than not, they will leave a lot of their belongings with us after they leave. And we just keep it all in storage for them until their next visit.
It looks like something that's been here for a while. You know, it's not like the bag dump at King's Cross,
No,
is it?
absolutely not. There's a lot of our guests that literally come week after week, month after month, or regularly on an annual basis.
So some of this stuff might have been here for years then, or?
Yeah. We've got many guests that have quite literally stayed with us for generations, and they will maintain a full wardrobe here at Claridge's. When they leave, the valet and the housekeeping team carefully itemise every item, launder, dry clean, press everything, and keep it in storage here until their next visit.
So they just leave the hotel with their handbag and leave all the big stuff here for next time?
The next time they come back, they open the door and everything's laid out exactly as they left it. So everything back in the wardrobes, in the drawers, and pressed and ready for their next trip.
You know, the idea of living in a hotel is something that I think of as being one of the past, but there must be still some people who almost treat Claridge's as though it's their home.
Literally, their second home. They when they're in London, Claridge's is their address.
Claridge's aristocratic guest list was swelled during the Second World War, as many of the crowned heads of Europe took refuge in London, fleeing from the Nazis. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands had her own curtained-off corner of the air raid shelter. The King of Greece stayed under the pseudonym of Mr. Brown. and a second-floor suite was home to the royal family of Yugoslavia, the Karađorđević dynasty. Today's head of the family, Crown Prince Alexander, has resumed living in the royal palace in Belgrade, but in 1944 his father and heavily pregnant mother were beginning their years of exile at Claridge's.
Crown Prince Alexander was actually born in this hotel. In order not to cause problems for the Karađorđević succession, Churchill declared Suite 212 to be part of Yugoslav territory for the night. And so it could truly be said that the prince was born upon Slavic soil. A little bit of earth from the mother country was sprinkled under the bed.
Our Queen's his godmother, you know. At the end of the war, when Churchill lost the general election to Clement Attlee, he also lost his London home, so Claridge's offered him one of their penthouses to stay in. Churchill must have stood here and gazed over the blitz-smashed skyline towards Parliament, wondering at the ingratitude of the electorate. But Winston was already familiar with the rooftop suites at Claridge's. The movie mogul, Alexander Korda, regularly used one as his base. During Churchill's 1930s wilderness years, Korda employed him to write screenplays. None ever went before a camera. Probably both knew they never would. But Churchill's name on the company's headed notepaper, combined with the grandeur of a suite like this, helped persuade investors to back Korda's movies. Unfortunately, most of them lost money, but at least Korda could pay his hotel bill. Another pivotal moment in the history of British cinema occurred down in the depths of Claridge's.
In 1952, after a meeting at Claridge's, J. Arthur Rank, the owner of Pinewood Studios, was standing at these urinals with the Italian film producer Filippo Del Giudice, producer of In Which We Serve and Olivier's Henry V. Del Giudice was a very enthusiastic sort of man, and in the middle of making a very emphatic point, turned round and weed all over Rank's shoes.
From then on, the Rank organisation was no longer willing to invest in Del Giudice's films. A brilliant career in the bin. Film people may have occasionally been allowed to lower the tone at Claridge's, but its core clientele remained royals and heads of state.
In 1947, when the hotel put up many of the wedding guests of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip, a Buckingham Palace courtier made the mistake of ringing up the hotel and asking to be put through to the king, to which the telephonist replied, "Which king, sir?"
When a head of state beds down here in an official capacity, their banners are hung outside the building. For the funeral of George VI in 1952, extra flagpoles had to be stuck into the brickwork because at the hotel were 3 kings, 3 queens, 10 princes and princesses and 12 prime ministers. The tradition carries on today.
If it's an official visit, we'll be told in advance from whichever embassy whether or not they'll want to fly the flag of that particular country.
So does that mean that down in the basement somewhere there's the flag of every nation tucked away?
There's certainly a flag for most countries in the world.
Claridge's cosy relationship with the palace has had one very important consequence. When the monarch invites a visiting head of state for an official banquet, they feel obliged to have her back to their place before they leave the UK. And in most cases, their place is Claridge's.
The return state banquet is usually a dinner, though more cash-strapped countries can opt to invite Liz and Phil over for a bit of lunch. Heads of state being what they are, not all of these figures have been particularly cuddly. The Ceausescus hosted a slap-up meal here 10 years before taking the bullet. Another government delegation was actually deposed while they were staying at Claridge's. When they returned to their capital city, they were all shot at the airport. While the VIPs butter their rolls, the real work goes on downstairs.
Obviously there's always a few nerves on that night because the Queen or, heads of state are here. We do the return state banquet. So, for example, with Morocco and Saudi Arabia, they actually want us to try and recreate their food, which is not always possible. So what we have to do is look at what they're doing, analyse their food, and then see what we're actually going to be able to do with it. So we might have to westernise it a little bit. We have to make sure that it meets our standards as well. But they've all been very successful, and I think it's kind of working with the people to keep everybody happy on both sides.
Domestic royal occasions have also been hosted at Claridge's. The Windsors must have read that brochure about saving the expense of entertaining at home. The post-coronation party was held at Claridge's, so was the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh's Ruby wedding dinner. And this was also where the big reception was held to mark the wedding of Charles and Diana.
It was quite a do. The guests drank the house dry of Paul Roger champagne. And here's the actual list of what they had on the night. And in the fine tradition of preposterous franglais menus, the guests ate le kedgery de haddock. And this is the guest list from the night.
The royals are all in a separate list at the top. Down near the bottom of the first page is the monarch born in Suite 212, Crown Prince Alexander of Yugoslavia. And there's another name which brings our story back to its starting point, the origins of the hotel as a well-upholstered pad for a spot of regal adultery. Among the commoners is a Mrs. Parker Bowles. If Claridge's is still a favourite venue for aristocratic indiscretion, the hotel isn't saying. Of course it's not. That would defeat the point entirely. There hasn't been a return state banquet here for 5 years, but that doesn't mean the mini bars of Claridge's are no longer patronised by kings and queens. It's just that regal ostentation is no longer in fashion. How can it be when royals get married in registry offices?
But that doesn't matter to Claridge's. Even though the royal set that founded it now seems rather clueless and besieged, the hotel's still here, and it has as much class as ever.